All right, we are live, and Nate was just saying that he's in good stead for upcoming videos because he hates everybody. Tell me about
it. No, it's good being like the great part about not being right or left, but just kind of being in the center state is that I can call out the bullshit on both sides. You know, I can call Joe Biden a plagiarist, right? Because he did it.
Like, not?
Yeah. And it's sad because I think when we all are still starting to look at things politically through this lens. And I think that lens is now starting to corrupt what the actual facts are that are presented in these type of arguments. And I've always learned that if you want to be fair in trying to understand something, there's facts that shouldn't change, right? Facts are true by nature. They are facts. And our opinions are how we interpret those facts. But I think the problem that we have now is the facts. We know the facts are the things that are in dispute, right? What are the underlying facts? And and I think if you're left, those facts are something different, and when you're right, those facts are something different. And I think that's the underlying problem that we're running into today. The facts shouldn't change based on political, your political leanings. It should be.
Well, it's 100% confirmation bias, right, David? I mean,
I think the issue, the facts. I'm not sure that there have ever been. I know that I believe that there are objective facts, but I think now the problem is the facts have been so infused with subjectivity that people don't actually know what a fact is versus what an emotion is. They don't know what a fact is versus an interpretation. And people have lost, in my humble opinion, I think social media has done nothing to help. They've lost all critical thinking ability to the point where they cannot distinguish between fact and opinion and where a fact is being infused with opinion. And it's a problem.
Well, it's cherry picking. I mean, one of my favorite things is, I've thought a lot about the oath that you're supposed to take before the court. But, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth. I think everybody overlooks that whole truth and nothing but the truth. Because, if you think about it, most liars, and okay, I have body language people on. I'm very interested in liars. The best ones in the world will tell you 99% truth. It's always that one little niche that you can slide into all kinds of things. Statement analysis, body language, whatever you want. And they're generally truthful, but all you need to do is shade that one little element and you make an entirely different story.
There's no, I only think back to one of an experience I had in law where it was such deceit because it was the omission of the most material fact, which, but for the fact that you didn't know it existed, you would have never known it was missing. And that is typically, there's manipulation, there's, overt lying, but the most deceitful type of lying is the one that you don't even know that you're missing because you don't even have the information to know that it's being withheld. And you realize this in dealings with everybody. You need to ask questions discreetly, politely, but you need to get at questions to make sure that something material is not being withheld.
Yeah, and that where we're going with this is I was watching Nate's video of today earlier, and kind of I have to admit you had me laughing to start. You're like, oh, I like the Young Turks. I'm surprised, and I'm like, really, dude? You're a little bit late to the show here. Everybody knows they're completely full of shit. Everybody. I mean, even and by the way, as I pointed out earlier, don't ask people like Steven Crowder, who obviously hates them because they're political enemies, but look at somebody like Jimmy Dore, who worked there, is very much, supposedly on the same side, a lefty, and he can't stand them. He spent weeks now thrashing the hell out of Cenk and Anna.
Yeah, it's the thing that surprised me because I watch media for entertainment. I watch the Young Turks for entertainment, but it's weird because of my feed. You see like the extreme right-wing stuff and the extreme left-wing stuff because I find it all entertaining, like, oh, this is what they're saying. And then I kind of, after sifting through whatever misinformation they give, then I say, all right, let me do a little more research and try to find out, what's real, because all the truth is really in the middle somewhere if you really, search for it. But but I was surprised because this video was 2021. So I could even ignore something that was maybe, at the beginning where information was kind of sparse, to get. But a year later, when these facts have been demonstrably found to be not true and to be spouting them out as truth, that I think is not misinformation. That's disinformation, and
Sure.
they have 5 million subs. This disinformation. Go ahead.
Well, this is the thing. Now there is the same misinformation on both sides. The major difference is that when you call it the far right, misinformation is generally regarded as being far right out there. The far left disinformation is mainstream. That's the thing. It's like the Young Turks is not regarded as conspiracy theorist fringe material. It's mainstream. Whereas even you could take, I don't want to take any bad example to do injustice to them, but you take someone who's considered to be fringe right.
I'll help you out. I dare you to do a video on Linwood.
Well, it's demonetized.
There you go.
You know what? Just something interesting. This video was initially demonetized, right? I uploaded it. It was demonetized. Literally, I'm just arguing about what they said.
Hold on, I gotta check this one. YouTube freaking, I get a yellow thing the second that you go on.
Yes. And then I had to wait for like a day. And then when I finally, then I was like, okay, it's monetized. Because I'm just responding to their video. But they do it to me all the time. Everything that's right-leaning is demonetized. Everything that's left-leaning, he can say that. So it is.
I'm convinced now it's not even politically oriented. It's just algorithmic or AI. Certain words. You have certain words in it. Then
like Viva Frei.
Well, Viva Frei. I don't know if I'm there yet. But you have I don't want to say the word. You have a certain.
There it is. I just turned it on. Limited. The second I turned it on.
So you might be using some bad description words there. But and Nate, your video.
Where do we go from here?
Oh, you got it. This is the interesting thing. Are people now tuning in, seeing the bumper ads that start on a green lighted stream? If people are seeing the ads, hey, whatever. But Nate, this is the thing. I was watching the video, your Young Turks analysis, where the number one lie, Breonna Taylor was sleeping when they busted down the door.
Yes.
Here's the thing. This is how when words cease having meaning, that statement can be accurate, in the mind of the person who's saying it, if what they mean is, I don't mean she was literally sleeping. I just mean it was a no-knock raid at 12:30 when people are typically sleeping. So I'm not using sleeping like under the sheets, literally. I mean, it's a nighttime raid, therefore catching people by surprise, figurative use of the word sleeping. This is the problem, which we've all gotten into the habit of, is diluting the meaning of words to the point where you can't agree on facts because we can't agree on definitions anymore.
Well, you know what? When I practiced, it's always, I used to always say this. If you're explaining, you're losing, right? If I had a defendant, when you go up there, if you're explaining, you're losing, right? Because as soon as you get caught up, if you're starting to put a whole bunch of words out there and people are trying to follow you, then it makes you just look less credible. Then you say, oh no, of course not, And then why not? Then you can go into, but the side that's generally explaining against something that's clear is generally the side that's losing. And in this particular context, the guy from Young Turks said specifically, she was killed while sleeping in bed. Now, even though you look at the comment section, you saw people in the comment section, well, he really meant this. He really meant this. I'm assuming he really meant what he said. She was killed while sleeping in bed. That's exactly what he said.
It's the same way people say that Trump was talking about a physical wall, that it's not a physical wall. He did say physical wall. He made it really, really clear. So you can go both directions.
It's even like this. I had the biggest argument I had last week was about Trump and the Capitol riots. Right now, last week I was a right-wing, Trump-supporting, megalomaniac. So the argument I was having with a couple of my left-wing friends was that was an incitement. So they're like, "Oh my God, how can you say that? You're a black man." I'm like, hold on. If someone says, "I want you to walk down in front of the Capitol and peacefully say," that's not incitement. There's no legal definition of incitement when somebody says go down there and peacefully protest. That's not incitement. I'm sorry.
No, but when words cease having meaning and they can mean anything, when he says peaceful, he doesn't mean peaceful, and everybody knows it's what happens when language gets weaponized. And so when he said peaceful protest, first of all, he didn't mean it. His true supporters know that he didn't mean it. He meant break in. And he only said it once at the beginning of the speech, then followed it with an hour of passionate rhetoric about how unfair everything was. So he truly didn't mean it, even if he said it. This is how reading intentions is flawed reasoning. Diluting the meaning of words leads to this type of, when I say it, it means what I want it to say. And when you say it, it means what I want it to say.
Right.
And it's just it's how discourse falls apart.
But look what just happened now. With Cenk from the Young Turks says she was killed while sleeping in bed. there's a whole, oh, but he really didn't mean it. It really meant this. Trump says, go and peacefully protest. He's inciting the riot.
That man attack with all
like,
arms.
What? Yeah. like in one, I have to read into the motives under the first one to be good, but I can't read in the motives of the second one. And that's why, even though I do understand why they impeached Trump, but incitement, that speech just wasn't incitement. I'm sorry. I know a lot of lefties are going to hate me for saying that, but there's no way somebody can say, go peacefully protest, and then you turn that into incitement. It just is not there. And I'm sorry for people who believe that, but if you believe that, you've been fooled. I'm sorry. You've just been fooled. Go listen to the speech and stop listening to what people are telling you. Listen to the speech.
Hold on, if you can, because in fairness, it's been taken down everywhere, which to me adds to the whole narrative. It's like, if it's so evil, why are you hiding the ball so much? It's like, wait, if you see it now, does that mean you're going to get incited and attack? It's nuts.
No, it's quite the opposite. It's deleted so that you don't know what was said, so that they can paint it the way they want. Same thing with the name Voldemort, the name that cannot be spoken. Deplatform, deperson, and so therefore there is no way to rebut everything you're saying, and you have no way of verifying it yourself. It is a memory hole. It is the digital memory hole. No one can see that video now, and therefore everything you hear cannot be contradicted by what might otherwise contradict it, or you might just think it was a dog whistle. You might see the original and say, hell yeah, this makes me want to go bust down some doors at Capitol Hill. It's but it is I don't want to say it's dangerous. It's what it is. It's politics. It's dirty. It is always the question of imputing the worst intentions to fabricated ambiguity for your adversary while you are zealous and zealous. This is not zealous at all. Pious, I mean.
Right.
It's what it is, but it's reached an insufferable level.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Eric. No, I was just saying, if Biden and the Democrats truly want to move forward from this, there is no way this impeachment is going to do that, right? It's only going to bring up the old wounds. Now, if I were Biden, you know what I would have done? I would have probably given Trump a pardon. I'm pardoning Trump.
And then say, his people are good people.
Yes.
We disagree, but I am hoping that together we can move forward as a country, because you're all Americans. You're all important to me.
That's what Ford did to Nixon. Now, even though Ford did lose the re-election, but I think that starts true healing, right? Okay, listen, even though they say Trump is bad, this guy, he didn't have to do that. He pardoned him anyway, right? The lefties are going to hate him. Now you get Republicans who are going to, okay, let's go with this agenda. Because now you have total control. Why reopen the wound? That's the reason why I honestly think I do understand why they impeached. And early I was saying, well, I would even vote for impeachment. But now I think it's just him. It's doing more. You can't say you want to heal the country. You can't say you want to heal the country and then open up the wound again. It just doesn't make any sense. And I hope Democrats understand that and say, okay, listen, let this guy go, let him have his peace. And and if people
they're not going to do that, first of all, because they want to make sure. I think they have the most the politicians. I'm not labeling supporters. The politicians have the most sinister of motives. They want him to never be able to run again because they perceive him still as a threat for 2024.
But that's anti-democracy, though, right? That's if that's the argument, they're saying we don't want the people to choose who wants to lead them. We want to take that choice away. That's anti-democracy. They
try to impeach him on the, and I'm calling it the fabricated Russia file, because we know now that it was literally fabricated by FBI attorneys. They tried to impeach him on that. It's quite clear that they don't have respect for the democracy that they purport to. And I'm saying this about the Schumer, about Pelosi, not about individual citizens. It's clear that they were prepared to override the will.
Don't let Adam Schiff out of it.
Schiff also. But it's quite clear that they don't. The politicians don't care about that, because this is politics. It's not just about victory. It's about crushing your victor in victory. And it's crushing. Sorry, the loser.
No, you're right. You're right.
It's the dirtiest of all politics, and it has just become standard accepted practice. If I were the citizenry, I would be up in arms about this type of abuse, because the reality is the government. I've always said this. It's a make work project. They don't actually they don't create work for themselves by solving problems, and they have all the interest in the world to fabricate and to exacerbate the divide.
Well, there's one thing I just want to say before people start correcting me and saying, Nate knows he's talking about. Biden cannot pardon Trump for impeachment, but he can pardon Trump for any crimes against the United States, as what Nixon did. So he obviously can't pardon him for the impeachment process. That's the one thing you can't pardon for, but he can pardon him for something else. And I think pardoning Trump at this particular time for anything would be a grand gesture of hope and unity, because that's what we need. And I think you guys would agree, right? If Biden was pardoning Trump, it would be unity.
I would push back on you. I would say pardoning Trump would actually be a needle and an act of war. It's as if to say that he's done something that requires a pardon. I would just take the pious route and say, like Barnes suggested Biden do during his inauguration speech, say it is a time for actual unity. It's not an actual time for branding 75 million Americans racist. A large portion of those 75 million are in fact minorities. To call them racist or to call them race traitors. I mean, there is nothing the politicians are doing to bridge the gap, to unify, period. And the more they say, you want to talk about dog whistles, when they talk about unifying and in the next breath talk about impeaching, reprogramming, re-education, still running with the 75 million racists, Trump enablers, they know damn well that they have no interest in unifying, and it's really gross to watch. But what can you do?
Yeah.
Well, this is my concern: is everything out there. You have to read not only the headline, but now you have to read at least 3 to 4 paragraphs in to find the contradiction to whatever headline. And why this concerns me is I was talking to my boss. I have a day job, and he was just going and just spouting off, whatever was in the news. And I'm like, well, that's not accurate. No, there's nuance here. No, there's not. Well, this guy works 60 hours a week, and his only relaxation is he occasionally gets the newspaper. So whatever is put on that page, he's not going to spend any time digging in. And in fairness, we have to spend a whole lot of time. Like every article I read now, I immediately start off with the premise that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And then I have to sit there and find, okay, here's another source. Now, okay, this source is probably considered a left source. So let me find a right source. And if both are writing a similar thing, then okay, there's probably something here. But nobody should have to do that. It's really, really, really aggravating. And it bothers me deeply that the general person who doesn't have time to research every freaking article, every news story that comes across the station is just going to be, fed whichever way it goes.
I have a belief that it has always been this way. It's just been less exacerbated because of the advent of the internet. So back in the day, there was more trust, and B, there was less competition. So 60 Minutes, when I grew up, we used to watch it. It was authoritative to the point where I would never even question it. I have no doubt, in retrospect, they were spinning and they were misleading. But the degree of spinning and the degree of misleading has become exponentially more exacerbated given the open internet and the free flow of knowledge. So to drive, and you have to confuse in order to conquer. And so it's what the media is doing now. But the media is, I suspect, it's as dangerous as it's always been, if not more so now. But it's just getting more so now because it actually has to fight the current of the layperson finding information on their own.
Well, I don't want to say I disagree. I think media is too broad of a term, right? Because I think you have journalism and then you have entertainment media, right? And right now, journalism is supposed to be, well, here are the facts to a situation, like with Breonna Taylor. Here are the facts. Here's the warrant. Here's this. Here's this. Here are the facts. And when we think of media, when I think of media, I think of that fact-based driven. Oh, here are the facts, and then my opinion is drawn off of those legitimate facts that they're supposed to bring. And then you have opinion shows where you go and you see, okay, this is what other people think about these facts. But now I think the media, there's no difference in where between the line between the facts and opinion. They're kind of all like even with this Young Turk video, they were throwing out opinions, but label them as facts. It's a fact that she was this. It's a fact. No, those were opinions that they're portraying as facts. And now it depends on what media outlets or what sources of information can you get those first pieces of information where it is just factual. So you can, Viva says it all the time in his videos, just give me the information so I can come to my own opinion. But that's just not what's happening. Right now, we're being told what to think through these opinions and not given the facts so we can come to our own opinions.
Yeah, but what happened to the word allegedly? That's one thing. At least they had the courtesy to couch it a little bit and say allegedly. Now they don't even bother. They're just saying
now it's beyond that. It's beyond including the standard qualifiers. Now it's a question of running with the narrative and just hammering it to the point where people have no choice but to repeat it themselves. Labeling what happened at Capitol Hill an insurrection is in my humble opinion an absolute abuse of language, and it's an abuse of language and a dilution of what insurrection actually is. I would have no problem calling it a violent protest, a riot, no problem there. But to call it an insurrection, and then they did it for a reason. That way they can draft the articles of impeachment on the basis of charging insurrection. But it's above and beyond now, dropping the caveats, the qualifiers. It is about absolutely abusing, misusing, and repeatedly so that people just end up repeating it. And now the talking point, insurrection. It's impossible to talk about that or see it discussed in mainstream media without referring to it as an insurrection. Is legally different than a riot.
Point on the loaded terms. Do you remember Ruby Ridge and Waco? Yeah. Well, you know what they had at Waco? They had a ranch and a house. It was called Ranch Apocalypse. They called it a compound.
Yeah.
So some of the terminology has been, working, for a while now, because that's now 30 years old, damn near. So, but you're right in the sense that it's been around, but still.
No, and I grew up as a Canadian. As a Canadian, what did I know about Waco? Yeah, I knew the headlines, and what I knew was so radically changed when I saw the series Waco, which I had to double check. I watched the series Waco, and I'm like, holy cows, this is so diametrically opposed to what I was brought up.
You thought you knew.
I had to go fact check the Waco, and the series was exponentially more historically accurate than any other media. Like the only thing that wasn't accurate was the physical appearance of the main characters who changed radically over time.
that happened to me so many times too.
No, I'm saying there's no way the FBI was blasting these noises with children in there for 24/7, lights flashing. I said, there's no way they would not engage in that type of, I'll call it terrorism on civilians. There's no way they did it. I said, there's no way they went in with the flashbangs and it's like, holy cows. And then they start showing clips in Waco. I said, no, those have to be recreations. There's no way that actually happened. Mind blowing. And you realize that we were deceived then, and they're losing the ability to continue to deceive now.
Yeah, they used incendiary devices when they weren't supposed to. That was a horror show. But I one thing that I'm going to, it's funny because I got in trouble about the whole insurrection thing. At first, I was calling it, this is insurrection. Oh,
I remember that, yeah.
And then I had a friend of mine goes and he's like, hey, Nate, you know me, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know you. He's like, I'm a Trump supporter. I'm like, of course I know you're a Trump supporter. That's the reason why I hate your fucking guts. So he's like, he's like, do you think I'm really an insurrectionist? I'm like, no, I don't think you're an insurrectionist. He's like, I was down there. I was like, oh yeah, how was it? He was like, I never went into the building. Everybody went down there. We went down there because we were going to protest like they did last year. And he was like, remember 4 years ago? They were out there protesting and they do this every 4 years. He's like, this wasn't an insurrection. And he's like, the problem is that, they just weren't prepared for all these people. And then when some people went, it just became too much for the mob. And I remembered this thing because you guys know I used to be in law enforcement. I remember one time we had planned for this event. And I remember my boss was like, hey, Nate, we're just going to have like maybe 5 officers here. But I'm not like, you sure? Because, this thing get a little rowdy. He's like, nah, we'll just have 5 officers. So then the place became overrun, right? It became just too many people. It became overrun. We got in some trouble. So after that event, they were looking, who's to blame. So my boss is like, I want to blame Nate. So I'm like, no, I told you, you only had 5 people. But the higher ups didn't blame the riot. Obviously, there were people who broke the law and they got things. But the higher ups didn't say, that was just an insurrection. They came over to take over the building. They blamed us. And they blamed us because we knew this was going to happen. We were unprepared. And because crime is opportunistic in nature, if you allow the opportunity for criminal activity, it can and will generally happen. So in that instance, the people who were held accountable were the people who are unprepared. When I'm looking at the Capitol riots and that event was woefully just underprepared, right? You didn't have enough officers, no riot gear, no none of that stuff, right? And you knew these people were coming. You knew they were coming to storm the Capitol. The Capitol Police knew it. The news media knew it. They all knew it. And they were unprepared. And now they want to blame the people who came there, because if you only got one guy and you got 5,000 rioters, of course he's going to be overrun. But now I think the problem is that no one wants to call it out what it is. The Capitol Police should be ashamed. And that's why they're all being fired, right? The head of the Capitol Police was fired. This guy's fired. Everybody's leaving their job. But now people want to blame the protesters and not blame who's actually responsible is the people who are unprepared for this protest.
And if anybody hasn't seen Nate's breakdown of the Capitol Hill protest riots, check it out. It has more information than you're going to get anywhere, because what invariably happens.
Demonetized too, right?
Yeah, it was demonetized. You know,
of course.
And they put the permits. I put the permits up. They're like, demonetize the permits.
No, this is the amazing thing, is that the media likes to forget that it knew things, and so the media is never going to remind itself and remind the people that they knew well in advance this was all in the works, and all in the works being a massive protest on Capitol Hill. And yeah, you get there with cops on bikes compared to the riot gear that we had more prepared police during our NHL playoff riots than they had at Capitol Hill for a 500,000 person march. It was what it was, and it was not prepared for, or it was.
Oh, it was.
Yep, very true. This is a good way to put it. Not woefully underprepared, willfully underprepared.
There's good reason. There is good reason to suspect, and you don't have to be much of a tinfoil hat theorist, that this was the best thing that could have happened from a political point of view to do exactly what's done to Trump.
Oh God, yeah, especially and Allison Morrow, who I've had on the channel a couple times, even with Viva. She had a photographer who was in the midst of it all, and he was talking about the night before, and this guy, he's been through all the Antifa stuff as well, and he said this is unusual because typically, as he put it, the MAGA protesters and the right-wingers are not violent. They're pretty peaceful, and he's been to all these Antifa riots and all that. He said that he was talking to some of them, though, and there were some downright, straight-out white nationalists in the mix. And he was talking to one, and the person said that he had literally watched hours of video on Antifa studying the tactics. So he was like, the police knew this. I was talking to them. People were talking to them, but yet nobody did anything. There's a lot of confusion. I also keep thinking about the images of people that are lined up and crowded between velvet ropes. It's like your average rioter doesn't go into a building and stay within the velvet ropes and kind of look around and take selfies. So I think that added to the confusion too. I think you had some really bad players. And by the way, I'm going to defend BLM at the same time, because I think they're out there legitimately protesting something that they hate. And they have Black Bloc and Antifa, some real troublemakers in the mix. Well, you have the same scenario there, I believe, with people saying, hey, the doors are open. It's a public building. I see a bunch of people going in. Let me march in and see what's happening. And they just kind of are looking around, not realizing that there's violence going on the other side. I mean, the Capitol is a huge place. Have you guys been there?
Yeah. I've been there before.
It's really, really, really easy to miss that.
But
no, go ahead, Nate.
No, the one thing that I think with the whole Capitol thing, and I'm just going to say it, it's just too convenient. It just is. And I know people hate the fact that I'm saying it's just too convenient. He goes and says, we all know that they were going to march to the Capitol to scream outside, like they always do, right? They always do this. And so it wasn't like it wasn't known. Trump goes and he does his little, the election was stolen, rah, 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 go down there and peacefully protest. He says the word peacefully protest, which is all good. And then when they get down there, they meet nobody. It's like 3 cops, around this huge complex, the Capitol. And it's just like, it just seems utterly convenient that this all happened. And now that's the thing that sends Trump over the edge and sends them. And now to the point where they're impeaching him after he's left office. There's a lot going on here. And I just don't believe the BS. You know what I'm saying?
And they're going to use it as an excuse now to bone up on domestic terrorism laws and deplatform it. It is the convenience of it's the political convenience of tragedy. And the problem is politicians are never shy to exploit, or even, I don't want to be more cynical than that, but to exploit tragedy or bad stuff for political gain. And they're doing it up the wazoo here.
Actually, on that note, Allison Morrow contacted me from the side. Her ears must have been burning when I brought her up. But she had a question. She's trying to get through, and surprisingly, YouTube's giving her problems. She wants to know if government employees can be fired for even being in DC, like the Seattle PD officers on paid leave right now and under investigation, even if no crime was committed, or is that a First Amendment issue?
Well, hold on. Say it one more time. What was the question?
Essentially, there are Seattle cops right now that are on leave under investigation because they were at the Capitol. And she's saying, can people be fired like that who were just there? Or is that a First Amendment issue that, they're on their time, they're off work, they traveled to, we'll call it a riot or whatever you want, but they didn't know it was a riot, much like your friend. I'm sure your friend wasn't smashing windows, was he?
No, thank God, no.
Well, you see, there you go. So is that not a First Amendment issue? That whole thing of, you were there and we're going to put you on leave.
Oh, but it's even worse than that, Nate. It's put on leave. No fly lists for a lot of people. Some people are having their banks stop doing business with them if they determine that they were down there staying at hotels. Being blacklisted from, I think, Airbnb for anybody who booked to go down there.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, Nate. I mean, I think the answer is obvious. You go.
It's more complicated than just a simple yes or no. The reason why is because the Bill of Rights, specifically the First Amendment we're talking about, is against government intrusion, right? So the government can't stop you from speaking. So it's called the state action doctrine, where these
those are government employees, they're cops.
Yeah, but first I'm just saying. So we're talking about the government being able to infringe on your right to speak. Then we're talking about employees of the government. So, for instance, when I was in uniform, I couldn't just go out there and say whatever I wanted as an employee of the government because, so forth and so forth. So now it all depends on your collective bargaining rights, right, from that union. So sometimes, for instance, with our union, we were law enforcement 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there were some things that we could do off duty, for instance. Like we were mandated, if we saw something happen, we'd have to arrest them. Like if we saw a crime happening, we were still mandated, even though it was on our own time, to arrest or whatever, to help individuals or whatever that have you. So it really is going to depend on their union and what their rules are for that union. Because if their union has agreed that, that conduct outside the realm of their employment could be a reason why they could lose their job or lose some benefits, then that collective bargaining process would be looked at as what's it called, as a waiver of that right. And it happens
though, because first off, you have to determine that there was a crime. Being there was not a crime. Last time I checked, if you're somewhere that something goes down, it's not specifically a crime. Two, if they were not wearing their uniform, because I was in the military, right? So if I went out somewhere and I was in my uniform, that's a whole nother parameter. So if they showed up wearing the Seattle police uniforms or something like that, then absolutely that's putting a whole new level on it because they're representational. But if they're in their own time and they did not actually commit a crime, aren't we pushing things a little bit on that? Collective bargaining agreement or not, being there, really?
Well, you've asked me. Well, just on the legal side, I think you're right. If they were in full uniform, that's a different thing. But for us, like for instance, when I was in law enforcement, even at the DA's office, I couldn't go hang out at a crack house, right? Because even if I was doing nothing and being, blah, 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 if I'm hanging out at a crack house with people who are using crack, then they're going to say, well, the appearance of you being in that crack house, hanging out with those people would be bad enough where we're going to, we're not going to allow you to continue to work here.
Okay, headline. I'm extracting this. Nathan's comparing the riot to a crack house. No.
Go with a brothel. That'll be a less controversial.
Even brothel, a trap house, right?
Well, it is Washington. That is a whorehouse. Right?
But again, it really depends on that collective bargaining agreement. Unfortunately, because that's what it comes down to. What does their collective bargaining agreement allow? And a lot of these collective bargaining agreements don't allow them to do, like, you can go and do whatever you want on your own time. But if this has happened to them, I'm assuming that their collective bargaining agreement has this leeway where they can say, we're going to suspend these people. It's tough, but that's unfortunately.
Well, what about releasing their names ahead? That's another follow-up in there. What about releasing their names to the public while no action has actually been taken place other than suspension?
See, I don't know what their agreement with their, what that agreement between that CBA is. So it could, for instance, like I know in some cop CBAs, like if there's a police involved shooting, the authorities can't talk to the cop for 48 hours, right? That's in the collective bargaining agreement. So it really depends on that collective bargaining agreement. But before I can say, it's wrong, if they've collectively bargained this out, then there's really nothing you can do.
Well, people in the comment section are saying, but those places are illegal. The rally wasn't. I think the issue.
I agree.
Well, one of the issues here, we all agree with that, but one of the issues is that what they are qualifying as having been attended is the insurrection riot breaking into Capitol Hill. Everyone's just lumping it together now because words have lost all meaning. But ultimately, they may have some provision in their collective agreement or their collective bargaining agreement. I think a lawyer would have no trouble finding an argument that it's an unconstitutional violation, and that's on the federal government side. As far as it goes on the private side, airlines banning people, companies firing people, banks cutting people off. Look, Robert and we've talked about this a number of times. We're getting to a point where they're going to have to add, clarify, or specify that political affiliation and political belief is going to be a forbidden grounds of discrimination. And I've always thought it should have been read into the Unruh Act in California. I think it should be read into everywhere, but we're getting there now. And if companies get away with political ideological discrimination, and we're stepping back 70, I don't know how long ago McCarthyism was, but I think we're very close to being there right now. We're going to step back to it.
We're making lists and checking them twice. So we're not talking Santa Claus here. So
we're weaponizing, like we've seen with the lawyers in the United States. We are, trying to disbar lawyers for whom they've represented based on political ideologies.
Right.
There's nothing more McCarthyist than that. It's an actual.
I agree. I think that crazy is one thing. Who they represent is another.
Yeah.
So,
of course.
Yeah, there may be something about seemingly unstableness. Real Bambooga, I know I've seen him on Viva Frei quite a lot.
He's got the good puns.
Yes, right. He's such a strong term. Can't we all agree on calling them mostly peaceful tourists?
No, they call the burning buildings in the background, weeks of violence on end, mostly peaceful, but they call a violent protest an insurrection. I mean, it's beyond bastardizing words. It is they are trying to lie to people, and if they succeed on enough people, they succeeded, and they have succeeded on enough people to just make this instinctive, reflexive terminology, despite it being absolutely bastardized abuse of the English language.
Well, I've got to pull this one up too.
Oh, but one thing I think isn't clear is that even though I don't think that you could ban political ideology, the consideration of political ideology in a private setting. It's because the person who's, if I say I don't want any Republicans to come into my home as a private person, I have the right to do that, right? Just as you have the right to believe that ideology. So in one instance,
too, Nathan.
No, but what I'm saying is that the reason why the private companies or the private person's right to exclude, right? You do have that. That's your fundamental right to exclude, just like it's your right. So if a company does say, I don't want X person because they believe, in something that I don't like, they do have the right to do that, just as you have the right to express those feelings. So now you're talking about two sets of rights, and whose rights should overcome? Should the person who believes this stuff overcome, or should the person who doesn't want this thing to be on their platform overcome? And that's where I think the balance has to be. And we have to consider that the person has the right to exclude whoever they want, and the person who's saying it has the right to say whatever they want. Those two ideas conflict. Who then is the right? Is a restaurant forced to, it's the baked cake thing, are they forced to bake a cake for people who they ideologically don't agree with? The Supreme Court says sometimes you don't.
Well, the biggest distinction that was not fleshed out in that cake case was they were not refusing to sell any cake they had already had pre-prepared. They refused
to bake a cake.
They refused to be ordered to print a specific message with which they disagreed, and that was one of the most convenient facts left out.
Well, and also it's like, just change it up a little bit. It's like, okay, well, you're offended on that, so let's go to a Jewish bakery and ask them for a Nazi cake. Let's go to a Muslim bakery and ask them for a pork cake. Come on, but let's be respectful too.
Isn't that? But that's different. If I'm saying, going to a Nazi, a Jewish person asking for a Nazi cake, that I think that's different in terms of racial bias or whatever, versus someone saying I don't want someone who supports Trump in my bakery, right? Because then it becomes, where's the line? When can I exclude somebody? I don't want this person, and for this reason, can I just exclude no one then? Have I lost my right to exclude anybody based on any reason? Because certain reasons we agree with, but in certain reasons I think is a little closer.
We're not talking about selling the cake. We're talking about if someone comes in and says, make me a MAGA cake, and it says, look, I'm not making a MAGA cake because I don't agree with the message. Buy any one of the ones on the shelf. buy a Magog cake. Magog is a place in Quebec, and then change the letters yourself. So the whole thing about like comparing it to the Nazi cake. I mean, you have issues dealing with the illegality of reproducing certain images. What was the other one? The going to a Muslim bakery and asking to make a pork cake. I mean, you're going to have one practical problem. They will not have that ingredient in shops. But the reality is that cake case was also mainstream media demonizing the defendants in a way that was never accurate, because they were never refusing to serve. They were just refusing to be ordered to make a specific message. Then you can disagree or agree with the message or their position, but that was the position.
Well, yeah, I actually agree with the ruling. With that ruling, I agree, because I don't think anybody should be forced to make anything. Like if I don't want to make it for whatever reason, right? I think as you know, you have the right to refuse.
Of a service that is a life.
Essential service.
That's where it gets really squirrely on that, because it's like, oh, I don't want to treat that person because I don't like them, or something like that. That's where
usually
I think those are the exceptions.
Even with that, most people don't realize that those are usually conditions of not employment, but conditions of certification. For instance, if you're a doctor, one of the conditions for being certified is that you can't use that type of reasoning to treat patients or whatever, that type of thing, to keep your license. So most of the states, for those licenses, you have to agree not to have that as one of the factors that you use to determine who you don't treat.
I'm getting very nervous. My video that I'm trying to upload for this afternoon, it has now been uploaded 40 minutes ago. I did it right when we started, and it still hasn't been processed yet.
What?
It's the Parler Amazon update, and
you're doing one IFA? That we were arguing about that earlier.
That's no, that's coming up. That's coming up. We're not gonna.
Hold on, I'll be back. Let me be back in 2 minutes.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about you. Go, hurry up. I got to talk about you.
I'm only going to say what we were doing before when I was making breakfast. Nate and I do the most counterproductive thing, which is try to have a discussion via text messages. And so in addition to the fact that the written word always gets misinterpreted, you end up texting over the last response, and it's chaotic. But Nate, my opinion of that Parler judgment is even if it's defensible in law, it reeks of motivated reasoning. This is the decision where the judge dismissed Parler's motion for a preliminary injunction. The TRO was converted to a preliminary injunction. And I was like, yeah, the judge was thoroughly convinced by everything Amazon said. I was like, that's great. But Nate's like, in law, it's justified. I was like, in law, it might be justified. But when every argument that one person raises is thoroughly convincing, and every argument that one raises is specious and unsubstantiated, and we're not dealing with like black and white case, it smells like motivated reasoning.
Oh, absolutely. And I got a super chat here about the swastika which is true. The swastika goes back to Native Americans. It's been used all over the place. Unfortunately, there's a new meaning for it.
Well, and as far as I understand and recall, I forget which way it goes, but in the Indian tradition, it was inverted. So I don't know which way the legs pointed out on the Nazi swastika, but the historical one was the other way around. So if the legs pointed left, on the other one it pointed right and gone down. I remember I used to burn incense as a kid, and I bought there was a special shop in Montreal that sold incense. Well, it was marijuana was not legal in Canada at that time, and the store
it's called a head shop, dude.
It was it was like they sold paraphernalia, but they didn't sell the
head shop.
Okay,
they call them head shops.
And I never went for the stuff. I just went. I love those mushroom patches that they made. So I had my jean jacket. But anyways, I bought incense, and I noticed on the incense I was like, "Holy cows!" I bought 1939 German's incense, and it wasn't.
That's too funny. One thing I wanted to bring up earlier, there was a chat that I brought up. We never got to it, but it is so true about how the whole thing of defunding police is suddenly not talked about. And did you find it a bit ironic, all of those headlines and tweets from journalists and everybody who said, say the name. And I was like, that's the first love I have seen from journalists for cops in a long time, that they're celebrating these, the cops at the Capitol. And it's good to celebrate cops, but I just found it very interesting that all of a sudden there was a newfound love for any cops.
It's weird. It's the awful media spin. David Dorn, the cop that was killed in the riots, I forget what city it was in. They never talked about it. And when an unarmed protester was shot by cops in any other prior protest, it was run 24/7. When Ashley Babbitt was shot by the cops here, not only was she some crazy insurrectionist who was up to no good, but they tried to pin the blame of her death on Trump. It wasn't a question of blaming cops overreacting or improperly acting, as has been the case historically whenever a protester or a civilian gets shot. This was, it's her fault. It's Trump's fault. And we're not even going to talk about the police violence, but we're going to talk about the police officer who tragically died during the protest. Whereas we don't give one sweet butter all when it happens wherever else it happened over the last year. It's really disheartening because, as far as I'm concerned, all these shootings are tragic. Nate and I agree to disagree on a certain element of Breonna Taylor, where I said, even if everything is accurate there, the fact that Breonna Taylor might have been up to no good, the fact that she might have been hanging with no good nicks, doesn't explain away what happened that night. And it's not because
here's the problem with that. And I've had Michael Wood on, and he's a police reformer. He worked in Baltimore, and he's tied in with all the Freddie Gray things. I mean, not that he was one of those cops, but he came to prominence during that time. His argument is that there are procedures and there's systemic problems. You can't necessarily blame the cops who are doing the job. If they're performing the actions that they are trained to do, or they're following their training, they're not necessarily doing wrong. The training itself could be wrong, and that's something that you can approach. And I need to get him on with you, Nate, because I think it'll be a really lively discussion. He has very strong views and opinions.
Nate, you did a video on Ashley Babbitt. I saw someone in the comment ask, like, do you think Ashley Babbitt was justified?
Do I think
from the cop standpoint?
Because again, a lot of people think that you can look at the event and try to see everything and just say, okay, was the cop justified? But the way the Supreme Court and the way the courts do it is that they say we're going to put ourselves in the role of the officer at the scene, and you could only look at the situation by the information that he had at the time of the shooting. So this officer being behind the door with the situation, riot, and the fact that you do have witnesses there saying that they were telling people, get back, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. It would be hard for me to say he was not justified in firing. But, there could be more information. But from what I've seen and from the way it's been portrayed, it seems like it's going to be hard for that cop to say that cop wasn't justified. An angry mob trying to get back there with VIPs, it would have been hard for me not to fire, because if she gets through, I don't know what she has on her. I don't know what her intentions are, and she's been properly warned. So, is it objectively reasonable? I think the cop has an argument.
I'm gonna translate this for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, and couille dans le potage means there's a ball, a testicle in the soup. So I'm not sure what the origin of that expression is. And at first I thought it said it was a coquille, a shell. No, il y a une couille dans le potage. There's a ball in the soup.
Well,
this is another thing to illustrate the faulty reasoning of imputing intentions. When Nate did the breakdown of Ashley Babbitt, everyone in or not everyone, a number of people in the comment section, Nate is conveniently ignoring from his analysis the fact that there are many cops behind Ashley Babbitt, which make it even more inexcusable. The conveniently ignoring. I don't know if Nate ignored it. I don't know if he made a decision in making the video.
I don't know that that's convenient. It's hard to tell.
No, in my view, I mean, I understand the argument. The argument is that everyone knew.
Can you guys answer this one? Was he security or police? I thought he was police.
He was police. What happens is that when you look at the whole video, the cop who was behind the door, and there were some cops coming up, some riot cops coming up to get those people out of there. But you'd have to make the argument that the cop who was holding the gun, pointed at this woman, knew that the cops were coming up the stairs. Now, could he have known? Is there some information? If that's true, then yeah, that would be something like, if you knew there were a whole bunch of riot cops right outside the door, then obviously you don't shoot. But if you don't know that,
well, he'd be shooting at his own people. That would be friendly fire too. So potentially, if he did know, he'd be canned just by shooting the same direction as
at his own people. Yeah. So
how about this one?
Go ahead.
The officer's death. Do you guys know the specifics on that? I don't personally.
Not only do I don't know the specifics, I only know the multiple differing accounts that I've seen in media, which is another amazing thing, is weaponizing misinformation and also just not releasing material information. But no, the thing is, Oh, how is that a warning shot? Well,
no. How about this? Nate and I think went over this. I think there's something in the law that you can't just fire. Like you have to be under imminent threat to discharge your weapon at all.
Yes. People fail to realize shooting at somebody is just as bad if you shot and hit them, right? Because the law recognizes threats of violence just as much as actual completed violence. So that's endangered. You're endangering somebody's life, even if you're shooting at them. And warning shots are bad because warning shots ricochet. Warning shots can hit other people, especially in crowds. Warning shots through the ceilings endanger the people upstairs, right? So there is no warning shot in that situation. Warning shot means he's criminally liable for putting other people in danger.
If I'm wrong, a warning shot can also trigger a response from other officers and other people, which can trigger a mass shootout. And people say shooter in the leg. Incidentally, one thing that sort of shocked me from your video, Nate, I had seen the video before, but on Twitter, and I was watching it with one eye closed because it makes me sick. Your analysis, I had no idea the cop was that close. I mean, it looked like 3 to 5 feet max. And people saying, why not shoot in the leg? The only thing I can think of, and Nate,
you can't see the leg.
Well, but people just
the only thing I can think of is that the whoever pulled the trigger knew there
center
were
mass. You shoot center mass. That's
because
the job.
People keep saying, why not just shoot people in the leg? Number one, that is extremely hard to do, right? Shoot someone in the leg, especially, and these are people who obviously probably just haven't fired guns. Shooting people in the leg is hard. Shooting center mass is hard enough, but then shooting somebody in the leg, and again, we're talking about, and let's just kill some of this misinformation. If it's been shown that trying to shoot somebody in the leg can kill someone just as shooting them in center mass. You have a lot of arteries and things in the leg. Where you shoot somebody in the leg, they are just as likely to die if you shot them center mass. So it's not like you're shooting them lightly to save their life, right? You could kill them still from shooting them in the leg. Actually, it's almost the odds are almost equal. The second thing is
femoral artery. People don't appreciate femoral artery runs down your leg. You'll bleed out in 2 seconds.
The second thing that a lot of people don't understand, they teach people to shoot center mass because they hope, and that's why cops use hollow point bullets, is that they hope the bullets stay inside and not go through you to endanger other people. So shooting somebody in the leg, you have a high probability of missing and those bullets going places where you don't want them to go. Where shooting center mass, you keep those bullets hopefully keep those bullets inside the body so they don't hurt other people. And third is training.
To address this one here because it's like, no, this is I saw the videos of vids of the shooting from 2 different camera angles. The guy who shot Babbitt took over 2 seconds to line up a shot. Hard to believe he was aiming center mass and hit her neck. I absolutely believe he was aiming for center mass and hit her neck. I've been around on ranges in the military. I've shot pistols, and you get a degree of stress or nervousness. Are you doing it mid-breath? Did you exhale? That's part of the reason for center mass too, is you have the best odds of actually hitting them.
Yeah.
What do you see, Nate? Are you surprised at all?
No, because you line up, you shoot, and sometimes you have the recoil with gun pulls up. There are a lot of things, and center mass. Yes, and they're usually teaching you to shoot a high center mass too. You're not trying to shoot stomach; you're trying to shoot up in here in the chest cavity anyway. So sometimes you can get neck because you're trying to really shoot in this area right here. But again, I think a lot of people feel like cops are these sharpshooters with the 2 guns and just shoot. It just doesn't work that way. And if you're gonna discharge your weapon in a situation like that, that's to stop a serious threat to someone's life or safety or a perceived threat. And you're not doing that unless you're trying to stop the threat. Cops don't shoot to scare people. We shoot to stop threats. That's what we shoot for.
Good point here. He had a mask on, which would mess with his line of sight and breathing. Absolutely.
That's true too. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I wish more people would actually go to the range. If I had my choice, I would make every high school class spend a day on the range and force every kid to at least just shoot in a controlled environment, to feel it, whatever their beliefs are, go for a target, get the experience of handling a weapon. So then you can speak from knowledge. And I do think that, they're scary. Guns are scary, especially if you haven't handled them. And the first time you handle it, it's a little bit freaky. Let people actually see what they are, how powerful they are. I think it'll teach them not only more about what's going on, but a healthy respect for the weapon.
It's the first time. It's funny because most people don't realize the first time most cops ever touch a gun is when they take them to train you for a gun. It's like you don't know, and the first thing they tell you, and they go through all the rules. Listen, I'm not going to die out here for you. Want to be lefties who are afraid of guns. We're going to learn. We're going to understand. And it's interesting to see even these big tough guys who want to be. They take a gun and they shoot it and drop the gun, and everybody's it's crazy because the fear. I think a lot of people just don't understand how technical and safe, if you ever go to a range, it's all about safety. It's all about safety. It's all about safety. And a lot of people who are not two-way people and people who just have this wholesale fear of guns don't understand how safe guns can be if you're trained properly with. It's just like even with the car. If you're trained properly with it, you're going to use it properly in a safe way. But if you're not, you're going to use it and that's what happens in the street a lot. People, a lot of times people will say, well, how come the cops always can shoot the criminals, but the criminals can't shoot the cops? Training. That's the difference. Training. We're trained on how to do it, and they are not.
Well, you have to qualify. You have to actually qualify.
Every year you got to qualify. Every year.
And not all cops are exactly sharpshooters. In fairness.
Oh no.
Let's just say the qualifications sometimes are a little tougher for some.
Yeah. I've seen some lose their qualification for a year. It's interesting, but it is what it is.
Okay, I'm not sure. Precedent: Minnesota nurse prosecuted for talking people into their suicides online for thrills. Q originators. Oh, I see. Are most responsible for these deaths. If they track them down, they're complicit. Well, that's kind of the Charles Manson type of prosecution too, or whatever else. I don't know if you can prosecute a cult leader necessarily. If you want to call Q a cult, it gets really, really, really murky on what can be done. But you guys are the experts, so you tell me about prosecuting people who are in Q.
It all depends on the state law. It all depends on free speech. There's a lot to that question. I don't think it's just an easy question you could prosecute them. There's a lot there.
I would drop the Q element of the question just because it's loaded and it's an unnecessary element. The question is, can you blame an online movement for something that results from it? Can you blame a leader? Can you blame? As far as I've known, I don't know about Q specifically. Let's just take people who were actively tweeting.
Let's say Church of Viva Frei, and Viva as asking for something to happen. No.
Well, if someone with a massive following, like if a PewDiePie gets up there and says do something, and then a million people get up and do it, they're instigating a riot. That I can understand, but people who support PewDiePie followers who just decide to do something on their own, no. Other people who generate a message about put it out there and other people act on it. No,
actually, PewDiePie faced a little bit of that because remember the New Zealand.
I remember that
New Zealand shooter brought up, and that's when PewDiePie went off the air for a little bit because I can only imagine the stress. I know you guys. If somebody put up your video or said something that you did or whatever in the midst of a horrific act, I don't even know how you could respond to that. No, it's not your fault, obviously, but still, it would just be
it's got to be devastating beyond words to even hear someone who does something like that mention your name. It's like, everyone knows it was done for he said it for whatever the reasons, and one of which was attention, and it worked. But that's got to be psychologically devastating in a way that I don't know how you can go see a therapist who can tell you it's not your fault and like pull your Goodwill Hunting move, but you're always going to have that, and the feeling that something you did in your platform and in your content motivated someone to do that would be a mind fuck. I don't like swearing.
Well, when we were training to do investigations, one of the things that they told us was that even in this type of context, how do I explain this? It's that it's not the tool, but the person wielding the tool. That's the problem. And for instance, with Q or anything, I can find people who read a Bible and say the Bible, how many horrors have been done in the name of the Bible? This is what the Bible says do, so I'm going to do it. The Quran or any book or anything of fiction or anything of nonfiction that you can put out there, people are going to say, well, hey, this is the reason why I did it. And I just don't accept that. If somebody takes one of my videos and say they've committed violence because of it, it wouldn't bother me. It would bother me that this person may have, done that. But at the end of the day, that's that person's choice, because I know my videos, 99.9% of the people who watch my videos aren't going to go do violence. And I understand if somebody.
No, I feel the same way, and I'm not saying it's rational, Nate.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's rational, but I just know, and I know David well enough to know they would eat him alive. And it would really, really bother me. It doesn't matter if it's rational or not. It's just the fact that it happened. It would just be like, what in the world?
It would, especially you start to ask yourself, like, you would ask yourself, is there anything that I've issued? Is there anything that I've conveyed by way of message that could have led this person to feel that way? And where it gets different, it's like, I do wonder, like, 9 Inch Nails, Cannibal Corpse, these music bands, or directors of movies who make these awful movies, who. And there, it's not even a question of whether or not it could influence somebody. It's just a question of whether or not it did, and to what degree. But when for Nate, I'm so comfortable with the message that I convey to the world. It can't be misconstrued that way. But then you get into like directors of Death Wish, or not the Born on it. What's the other one there with Keanu Reeves? Where it's
John Wick.
John Wick. Movies, which are going to motivate people. I would think they should, maybe feel a little guilty when things happen that seem motivated or inspired by that. But maybe, everyone has a different level of consciousness.
That's true.
Okay. Little Rock Super Chat saying that they can use RICO laws to prosecute, I guess.
No, because then you got to show that there's an organization, a hierarchy. See, RICO is just not something you can just throw out there. RICO, you got to show that there's some type of organization. There's some type of structure to it. I don't think you can get them on RICO. It's like trying to get Antifa on RICO, because Antifa, there's really no organization. It's kind of like this movement, and you have people saying I'm a part of it, but you don't have who's the leader of QAnon versus who's the leader of Antifa. You know what I'm saying? You don't have that structure where I think RICO would apply.
Oh, fair enough. Okay. And what your reference, somebody mentioned Judas Priest, and they essentially had that, Dave, with the Satanic Panic.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember that growing up. That was a big one incident where a guy, I don't even want to say what happened, but killed himself listening to, it was either Judas Priest or another one of those heavy metal bands. The other one that's like who's ever read the Virgin Suicides, you read a book like that, and it's tough to appreciate. I appreciate that it's art, and I'm not saying it should be censored. You appreciate that when you write something like that, passionate like that, you're going to appeal to people who are probably susceptible to hearing that message and feeling it in a way that most people shouldn't.
Well, that's why they stopped publicizing people's names, because there were suicide clusters.
And that's another interesting thing, getting into the COVID discussion, where I've been tweeting out, I want to know how many suicides there have been in Canada, how many ODs there have been in Canada, to see whether or not it's even comparable with the number of COVID deaths. And from what I understand, it is. But then you have people say, oh, well, suicide and overdoses are not contagious. Suicide's not contagious, not in a clinical sense, but they certainly influence others who get motivated from one person's committing suicide, which is why they don't mention it, and they don't publicize when it happens in the metro. They try not to publicize the high-profile cases of suicide because they know it inspires other people. I don't even know what the point was there. My point with that was anybody who's suffering, who's experiencing things, find someone. Don't get inspired by the bad stuff, and find people to talk to, because this era that we're living through is just tremendously difficult.
Okay, this is let me see. Should the individuals be exposed to deliberately provoked falsehoods that led up to this, rather than I don't know. I mean, this is hard to figure out.
Let me read this. Shouldn't the individuals be exposed who deliberately provoke falsehoods? So be exposed is doxing. Provoked falsehoods is subjective. So one person's falsehood might not be another person's falsehood that led up to this, rather than the vague specter to be used for anyone who doubted the election. This is a dangerous thing. This is the social media doxing, which has basically usurped the judicial process in terms of punishment and in terms of conviction and punishment from in a realm that's actually more damaging than a legal realm. Funny thing, Nate and I, we're lawyers. We've seen people who have gotten convicted of things which, if made public on the scale of social media, would devastate people, whereas most people don't even know about it. And so that's the legal process, and what we're basically promoting now is a lawless system with consequences that are even more serious than the legal system, without any of the checks and balances of the legal system.
So you've been publicly shamed.
No, so you've been publicly shamed. Read the book. It's just an amazing thing. It's doxing No, you get it wrong. It's the same reason why I happen to have changed my view on death penalty over the years. But doxing, you get it wrong. Doxing also, there's more to a story than the split-second devastation of someone's life. Falsehoods, promoting conspiracy theories, I'm very sympathetic to letting people discuss and believe what they want to believe to the extent they are not actively promoting some form of violence. So, this is why I'm sympathetic with any group who believes what they believe. They're entitled to believe it. Shaming them publicly, I'm not for that.
Well, hold on. Can you pull up that other comment again? Because I don't know. I didn't read it that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just being
okay. Here we go. Sorry.
Too charitable. But shouldn't those individuals be exposed to deliberately provoke falsehoods? Like, for instance, I'm assuming when reading this comment, I'm thinking they're talking about like what happened with the Young Turks this morning, right? They're promoting some falsehoods, and I'm saying, well, these are true, and this is the reason why they're true, right? Exposing that rather than doxing.
Well, those are public figures too, so that's in fairness. Go away, and you can point them to Young Turks. You're not doxing them.
Yeah,
you're pointing to a public figure, and I'm sure there's nothing wrong with that. I think both sides are both your points.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's being written wrong. I'm just saying, this is the one film, two screens. I mean, one screen, two films. Where I think I'm being too charitable, to it, and I think Viva is a little more critical to it. But I think we're both saying the same thing, but we just mean it in different ways.
Well, and I guess it means, what do you mean by exposed? For example, exposing legal when he fails or omits to mention that the Flynn colleague who got I guess that's terminological. I wouldn't call that exposing. I would call
that's an easy target. I mean, that's like any day that ends with Y.
No. What I'm saying is, like, if that's what we mean by exposing, like bring out the fact that they were misleading, then we're talking about the media, sure, but not in the sense that leads to any form of harassment as a result. Like,
of course.
Oh, okay. Here, I see what they followed up a little bit here. Didn't mean doxing. It means pursued by the FBI. The people who are brainwashed, essentially, and I'm not going to get into that. By the way, guys, tomorrow I have someone who grew up with Scientology.
Oh,
and that's going to be a lot of fun. So people come up with some questions, whatever. I'm on Locals, unstructured.locals.com if you want to ask questions ahead of time. But that one's going to be good. He literally was raised from the age of like 9 years old into his 30s with Scientology. His family brought him into it. So
wow, that's going to be.
We can talk about brainwashing then.
Yeah, I want to talk about how the FBI has exploited it for their own purposes. Like, the FBI going after it. There could be some people who might think that, intelligence agencies played a part of it. And what's the one I'm looking for? Oh, I mean, MK Ultra, which actually has, if anybody doesn't know it,
true.
MK Ultra, look it up, and it has its base, or it has a strong tie to Montreal, because Montreal, the psychiatric ward in Montreal was being used, I believe, by the McGill Medical to actually, I think it was administer drugs to homeless people that they could then carry out tests on. So
yeah, you Canadians, man. You also gave us Robert Hare, who created the psychopath test. Thank you very much.
We're all polite, we're all beautiful, but there's a darker side, much like Japanese culture, beautiful, wonderful architecture, everything. Watch some of the Japanese movies. They make some of the sickest, most violent movies you can possibly imagine. And South Korea as well.
And tentacles. They really like tentacles.
I've been into dark movies, and I have an obscure collection, but like the Audition, there have been Japanese movies and French movies. And it's whatever. All I'll say is like there's a stereotype of nations, and then there's the underbelly, and Canada does have some dark parts to its history.
But I do want to say this though. There's a difference if people are being, they're saying people are being brainwashed. Mm-hmm. The Lord looks at what's reasonable. Is it reasonable for people to believe this? Is it reasonable for people to? And
well, that's hard, Nate. I mean, in fairness, is it reasonable for an abused spouse to stay with somebody who's abusing them? So I pulled that comment up when somebody's saying brainwashing, you laugh. We're not laughing at people who are brainwashed. We're laughing at the uncomfortableness of the subject. And I'm absolutely sympathetic to any kind of an abusive relationship. And to me, a beaten spouse is very similar to a cult victim. Well, and I have experts on who will tie it together and say, yes, that's very, very true. It's like bullying the frog. It doesn't happen once.
Like from my reading of the question, it seemed like they were trying to say the election lies or whatever has led to people believing that this is true, and this is like the brainwashing, right? They're convinced that this is true, that this is not true, and these are the falsehoods. What I'm saying is that at a point, if you can prove someone's brainwashed, that's different than someone putting out information and somebody just believing the information to be true and not checking their facts, right? Not going that deeper mode. And I don't believe those people are brainwashed, but I believe the law puts responsibility on the individual to say, hey, if you believe this and it's false, then that's on you, But if
that's where it gets hard, though. There is definitely obviously nuance in there, and it's near impossible. You put anything out, somebody's going to believe it, somebody's not going to believe it, and you can argue it either way.
But I wouldn't say those people were brainwashed, right? Like the people who believe the Young Turks. I'm not saying they're brainwashed. I'm saying they just got bad information.
Who was one of the ones that Dershowitz represented who got pardoned by Clinton? They made a movie about it. Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst is the type of brainwashing, which was the type of brainwashing that we typically understand as brainwashing.
Except, by the way, there's even more to her story. I hate to throw this right back on you, but I've had a guy who wrote the book about the Sudanese Liberation Army.
Oh, wow.
And here's a big did you know? Did you know that Patty Hearst had a relationship with Donald Dufrese before he was out of prison? They had conjugal visits.
Oh, wow.
So the brainwashing question starts to slip a little bit because they already knew each other. And she was sleeping with him in a controlled environment that was inside of a prison. So it's not like she was under duress like she was when she was kidnapped. The kidnapping potentially took place because she was useful and was potentially in on it from the beginning. But there you go. By the way, that's Brad Schreiber. For anybody who wants to watch a episode in the past or listen to the podcast, everything out there, it's frustrating because we can throw another wrench into the works. Oh, hey, nice super chat.
Zerosifer.
Cool name and nice icon too. Thoughts? Normally I would have been against it, but given things now, I want news channels and journalists to need certification, and it being removed if blatantly false info is being spread or pushing punditry. News should be boring and lacking opinion, except who is going to give the registration? Who is going to determine their neutrality?
This is already in place. It's supposed to be in place. And I agree with it or disagree with it. The way it's supposed to work is that, for instance, you have news and you'll hear about press passes and so forth and so forth. Mm-hmm. So those news organizations, right, when they tell you stuff, it's supposed to be vetted, and they're supposed to have sources, and it's supposed to be factual. Now, if they, for instance, say something that's not factual or it's defamatory, they can be held accountable because they're presenting it as factual. But opinion shows that are producing opinions are not to be held as factual. So, for instance, Fox News walks this line where from 3 o'clock to, they say, from 3 to 7, from the 3 o'clock hour to the 8 o'clock hour, that's their facts, that's their news show. And then from 8 to I think after Laura Ingraham is their opinion piece. So there are consequences if you're opinion versus if you are facts for news. Again, it may not be what people want to hear, but that's just the way it's supposed to be.
And let me illustrate. It's a reflex to think the way Zerosifer's question is being phrased. Let me flip side. In Canada, the government, or the Liberal government, Trudeau government, is talking about having news agencies online apply for a certificate in order to broadcast. What would count as news? Who would issue this certificate? Who would revoke it? And what does that mean? At the end of the day, the news ends up being a slave to the government. It's not going to be any more objective than
it would be propaganda.
Yeah, it could be propaganda. Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean that's my worry, and I hate to jump at it really quickly, but that's anytime, especially right now, one of our worries is a new Patriot Act only going for an opposition political party, which is very scary.
First of all, people using the term brainwashing here. I think we're using the term brainwashing, and most people use it the same way they use the word like sociopath or narcissist. They use it. It's a medical thing, and they use it in a very broad way to just identify anyone who believes something that might be relatively fringe. There's clinical brainwashing, and it requires certain things. I don't know what. I mean, I sort of know.
Yeah, there's parameters. Sure, Manchurian Candidate, and there could be drugs. There's all kinds of coercion. And again, I'm having a Scientologist coming on tomorrow, so please, folks, check it out. And Scientology has been accused of brainwashing the individuals who are in the cult, and it is a long-term process, which Again, I'm not going to state anything to get myself in a legal jam, but some have called it very similar to techniques used by North Koreans in the Korean War, and that being a possible template of a long indoctrination procedure. And by the way, here's brainwashing for you. Basic training in the military is technically indoctrination training. It is literally named indoctrination training. And the point of it is to break you down and build you back up into a team member of that environment. So there's a lot involved.
There's things that are typically employed, regularly, like lack of sleep, certain type of nutrition for diet, or lack of repetitive behavior. So, and by the way, anybody not just reading John Ronson's "So You've Been Publicly Shamed," read "The Men Who Stare at Goats." If there's also some terrible things that the government has done to change people, or to force confessions, all sorts of things. So, but the brainwashing, I don't know how we refer to that. People believing what they read online, I wouldn't qualify that brainwashing, because it's typically it's voluntary, and brainwashing typically is not and requires.
Let's use Adams and just say loser think.
Well, read Scott Adams' Loser Think. Another great one.
That's similar to some of that, I think.
I did not. I thought it was better. I didn't like Win Bigly, but
no. Well,
the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power, because they control the minds of the masses.
Malcolm X.
Malcolm X, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And who is that? Avatar. That looks like Pee Wee.
Ernest. That looks like Ernest P. Worrell.
Yeah, Ernest.
Know what I mean, Vern?
Vern. Did
Someone said
you seen Vern? Because I know he always said the word Vern.
Well, there's also the issue with social media, the internet amplifying the message. There's no question about that. I wouldn't call that brainwashing. I would call that conditioning. And there's no question.
Well, that goes into Cialdini. I always throw books at you, David. So Robert Cialdini, Persuasion. Mandatory reading.
I don't know who. I think it was Scott Adams who talked about it enough that I think.
Yeah. Well, he talked about influence as well, but both of those are back to back. Influence and persuasion. And persuasion is all about laying out the message, like how you set up the room before they come in. A great example of that is, has anybody watched Darren Brown online?
Yes, Darren Brown, yes.
He had this amazing video where he took in these ad campaign people, and he said, okay, I need you to do a campaign. It's got to have these elements. And there was like a covered picture of everything that they would do. And they came up with the whole campaign, and it matched the picture essentially of what it was. And then he showed going back that when they took him there on the limo, they drove him by like windows that had things displayed in the windows and stuff like that, which had subconsciously influenced them to do exactly what he was attempting to accomplish. This really, really spooky stuff.
It's interesting. When I took when you're in law enforcement, they give you, and you move up the chain, from like officer to supervisor to even detective. There's a class they make you take. It's called an interview and interrogation, and that's how. And you have to take this course to learn how to get people to confess to crimes. And the first thing they tell you is that hold on, baby. The first thing they tell you is that be careful, because one of the easiest things you can get people to do is confess. It's happened to me. I got people to confess to crimes that they did not commit. And the reason why is just like what Eric was saying, setting up the scene. People, it's at the point where people want to go home. They'll tell you whatever you want to hear if they think that's the possibility of them to go home. Even some of the most horrendous things. And I know there's going to be a lot of people in the chat saying, no, I'll never confess to a crime I never committed. You don't know how easy it is to do. And I think we all forget how susceptible people are to conditions that when, because we don't live our lives in stressful conditions. So when you do have a stressful condition and people are saying you have to just say this to relieve the stress, 9 times out of 10, people will do that to just relieve that stress.
Yeah, and they use that. I mean, cops have been known to use that effect deliberately too, sadly. Let me see. Little Rock.
Oh, yeah.
CNN, MSNBC, and the others do the same thing that Q does. They feed you the information they want you to hear and make you believe everyone believes differently is the enemy. Sure.
I don't know what Q does, but I know what MSNBC does, and I know what CNN does.
Well, anybody who's putting out propaganda of any kind, I think that's a fair.
Well, it is with CNN and MSNBC. It's overt when you know what you're looking for. What shocks me is that I don't want to say it's like living in having taken the red pill in the Matrix, but
yeah, it's a red pill.
It is talking to people who still think CNN and MSNBC are reliable or don't appreciate the degree to which they're unreliable. That is always it's a frustrating experience because I'm not a patient person when it comes to fundamentals. When people don't acknowledge that CNN and I'll acknowledge that Fox News also, but I think CNN and MSNBC are 2 levels worse. When people,
not anymore. They're getting there.
But people don't appreciate that, and when people still read New York Times as reliable, that drives me nuts. And I find more often than not, it is, at least on paper, among the most intelligent, successful members of society, which is scary to me.
I think now I don't look at any media as being reliable. I read the story and I see if I can verify what's behind it. If it's something important to me, if it's something not important to me, where I can say, all right, I'll believe this, I'll believe it. Like even with the whole Parler lawsuit. The media was saying all this, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read it myself because they're spinning it as Parler's the worst thing on the planet. But let me see if what the actual claims are. And I think that's what most people have to do, unfortunately, now because everybody has dismissed.
One factual element I want clarification on in Parler is what is Amazon's hosting relationship to Twitter versus that to Parler? Because I have a feeling they're much more similar than the judge understood in the judgment, but I cannot make that. Call it accusation. I cannot make that suggestion until I know. But I have a feeling.
Curious, what would happen if you shut down the servers? And this is a problem I have, and I work in IT, and dealing with the web and everything else. I think that what I saw the Amazon do, if I was going to make an analogy with their whole suspension versus termination of contract, would be like this. Nate, you have a convenience store and I am your landlord. Mm-hmm. I give you 30 days, but I chain the doors. So now I haven't technically terminated you and evicted you, but I damn sure have ran your business into the ground by my chaining the doors up and locking the building. So now you can no longer conduct any business. And I think that's the bottom line contract problem. And is that a fair analogy, David?
Well, I hate forget the analogy because we don't need an analogy. We'll just go straight to the example. And this is where Nate and I have a disagreement. The agreement provides a notice to cure for material breach in one section. It provides a right to suspend in another section, which references another section that says the right to suspend can be invoked in the event of a breach. So this is where I like, and Nate's going to watch my video and tell me if I've convinced him. The judge says they could suspend unilaterally in the event of a breach because it's in the contract.
Right.
The contract specifically says that they can only they have a 30-day notice to cure in the event of a material breach. So now it seems that the interpretation the judge is giving to the contract says they can issue a notice to cure or they can just suspend immediately. And under both for being in breach of the contract. And that means to me that the judge has accepted an interpretation of the contract, which denies meaning to perhaps the most meaningful provision of the contract. And that's a faulty interpretation. Amazon cannot say we can both issue notice to correct, issue a notice to remedy a material breach, or we can suspend for a material breach, because then that means that there is no notice to cure. And it drives me nuts.
And I would argue that suspension and termination in the case of this is a distinction without a difference.
Totally agreed.
See, now this is where I disagree with two things. Let's say, for instance, it's the worst possible offense that Parler could have done. They've done, right? The contract seems to allow for two ways you can solve that. You can say, well, cure this, you got 30 days and do it that way. Or it can say, well, this is just so bad, we're going to suspend you right now because we think it's just so egregious. Now, if the contract gives you those two lines of reasoning, then you kind of figure out, well, which one is the one at play here? Is it you got to give me 30 days, or is it just so bad that you can end it right now? And it seems like both those pieces were in the contract. So if they are, and you're asking for, again, we're asking for an extraordinary remedy, which is a preliminary injunction, then if Parler's saying, well, we want to go with 7B1, right, that interpretation, and Amazon's saying, well, don't forget, we're actually doing this under 7B2, I don't think the court has enough to then say, all right, your interpretation is wrong, because both of them are pointing to the contract. Now we're talking about something on the merits, and now we're not talking about the extreme likelihood of winning. We're just talking about arguing which provision of the contract is more feasible.
Yeah, but they're arguing, and now incidentally, it's in the judgment, which is why I think the judgment is a bad judgment, is that the judgment doesn't say this was one of those examples that was so egregious it justified a suspension without warning. The judgment says it was a material breach for which they could suspend. And basically the judgment reads as though they have two remedies in the event of a material breach at their sole discretion. They can either suspend without notice, or they can give a 30-day notice to cure. That reading denies one provision meaning. But, and you know, is it one of those cases where it would have been like hosting what happened in New Zealand, the videos of that? There, if Amazon wanted to say, no, we're going to suspend you until you delete this specific video, fine. But even in the judgment, it was never a question of Parler refusing to abide by the terms. It was just Amazon saying, in our humble opinion, you haven't done it fast enough. No notice to cure, suspension done right away to a TRO. The only thing that, you know, might work against Parler's interests is that they said we can be up and running somewhere else in 12 hours. I'm sure they said that.
That was stupid.
Yeah,
that was a stupid
that undercuts their other argument of, you know, it destroys our business. But the second thing, like even with this argument, the fact that they didn't say we didn't, like, you know, Parler wasn't saying they didn't violate, you know, they didn't have this breach or had this content. They were saying that they want to be held under this particular provision, and Amazon saying
they also said they were redressing the complaints.
Yeah, but the argument isn't about redressing or even curing. It's about, did you guys do this? And Parler didn't say we didn't, right? They're saying, yeah, we had this issue and we want to cure it. And Amazon saying, well, you had this issue and we're saying we don't care if you cure it because we're suspending you. That's an argument where I think Parler loses. And the second part of the argument I think Parler loses with the Twitter is that for Parler's Twitter analogy to work, Parler is assuming that Twitter's contract and everything is identical to Parler's, which is possible, but it's possible that it's not. And if it's not, then you're comparing apples and oranges. So, you know, again, I think Parler lost because of the standard of a preliminary injunction. It's an extraordinary remedy. You're getting a company to do something it has a legal right to do. You're saying you can't do that.
Oh, that presupposes
it's extraordinary remedy, and with the facts that Parler laid out, just doesn't seem to overcome that standard.
Well, it's a presupposing of the conclusion to say they had the legal right to do it. That's specifically what's in dispute. But the issue, and this is where I disagree with you also, Nate, is that the judge says it. Parler didn't deny that they were in breach of the contract. That is wrong.
I will now put you guys up.
Oh, there we go.
And we're off.
When the judge says, and she says it multiple times, Parler doesn't deny being in breach of the agreement. That's false, and that is bad reasoning for the following reason. The contract says if you're in breach, you have 30 days to cure it. If they were not to cure it in the 30 days that they have to remedy a breach, then they would be in violation of the agreement. You're not in violation of the agreement by having committed a breach unless you don't remedy it as per the agreement. So this is where Amazon says they were in breach of the agreement, and the judge buys it. They weren't. The agreement provided if there is a material breach, you have 30 days to cure it. If they were to fail to cure it after 30 days, then they are in violation of the agreement. So it's a frustrating thing. But yeah, the judge.
I disagree with that, because I believe a breach is a violation of the agreement, right? They have an agreement, and if you breach it,
but if a breach is in the agreement.
But a breach is a violation of the agreement, right?
No,
that's what the breach is. So they're saying you've breached the agreement, but you have a 30 days to cure that breach. Now, since we do have the breach, because that's what we're talking about, a breach, there are two ways that you can address this breach. Amazon says we can address it through a suspension, or we can address it through this termination and cure. We're addressing it through a suspension. Now, I understand you may say, well, they've done it this way, but if you just look at those facts, the contract, and the provisions that allow Amazon to pick one of these particular ways, and they picked B instead of picking A. It's not like Parler saying we didn't breach. It's not like Parler saying we didn't have this stuff. They're saying, well, we just want it to be exercised under 7B1 instead of 7B2. If that's the argument, they should lose, because again, it's about an extraordinary remedy, and they're saying we want to force Amazon to only look at this one specific part of the contract and not the other part of the contract.
I guess that's where it gets hard. This comment actually kind of jumps into it a little bit, though. On the media, the MSM is selecting violent imagery that is inducing PTSD to the public. They have a choice in what they do, how they show information. If Manson was charged, then you have standing, correct? Now, I think I can wrap that to this argument by saying that we have the same situation where Twitter, and it was brought up that almost everything that they're accusing Parler of as being in breach is stuff that's out there. And the quote breaches were written in the contract because these are platforms and they have to have time in order to react to what's going on. So by any definition you want, you know that takedown was political.
Of course, yeah. I'm not even arguing with that. I agree with that. See, people get upset with me because I'm arguing the legal significance of whether what Parler has alleged is enough for a preliminary injunction, which I just don't think it is. Well, this is political. I do agree what they're doing is political, no doubt about it. But is it legally sufficient to get a preliminary injunction? I will
say this. I personally hope that every board member out there who is working with every startup in the business who likes to use AWS is telling their CEOs, get your crap off of Amazon, because guess what? Amazon has just proven that they absolutely will disregard any contract that they have or find a way to do whatever the hell they want because, and I think Nick Rekieta said it very well, that essentially there's a messianic complex with Bezos and Jack Dorsey and these others who want to show their giant wisdom over even the bottom line of the business. I don't think Amazon cares if they lose. Parler's a small player. Yeah. So I do hope that the other businesses really look at it. And this also, I hate to say, it feeds into the antitrust questions that are going against Amazon right now. And this is not by Parler or anybody else. It's by Yale University. There's an entire dissertation that was written about Amazon and their maneuvers. Have you heard of Ring? Ring is a perfect example. Ring used AWS. Amazon says, they're using a lot of traffic. Buy that company. Or Amazon Basics. So there's a lot of problems here. And I'm hoping that while I think Parler may be doomed, and I apologize, folks, I don't know, maybe they'll pull out a Gab. I don't know. But Gab has never really, been able to take off or hold its ground that well. Maybe they'll pull it out. I have my doubts. But at a minimum, hopefully that nobody company will be sort of like Netscape, the nobody company that ultimately took Microsoft and set them back decades.
Well, literally. What should be truly scary, I think people are starting to appreciate it. We're being controlled by big tech in a way that the government never could control. And Amazon, it's okay. So a lot of businesses are going to say, yeah, we live at the whim of Amazon. Incidentally, I mentioned that in the video, like this is going to be a victory for Amazon, but it might cost them a lot of business. Who's going to replace Amazon? Like, where are these people going to go?
Well, Microsoft has Azure. Ironically, the people who can replace Amazon are Microsoft, who got dinged before, and there are other cloud providers out there. So don't get it wrong. Microsoft is very, very strong with Azure services. But this comment's right to point of what I was saying. AWS is infrastructure.
Let me just add this thing to what you said. Parler has gone to 6 other web hosting services and been denied those other 6. So just FYI.
Right, which is like almost a cabal type of behavior, which is very, very, very disgusting. But AWS is an infrastructure company. They shouldn't have any say to content of their customers. Hello. They are protected by 230. Imagine the phone company canceling your service because they don't like what you talk on the phone about. Yeah. And there is a valid argument that they should not be peering into that. They are, in essence, that server that you bought from Dell to stick inside your server room. That's supposed to be what they're acting as, is your data center in the cloud. Whatever happens, they are protected from that, and they should not be stepping in. I think that's a very valid argument.
Yeah, well, they shouldn't, but they are, and that is, and it might only be a matter of time before your bank starts looking at your bank statements to decide whether or not to cancel you from service. It's like a new era.
That happened to me.
Sure. This is a good super chat, so I got to give it. I don't know exactly how it works, but or the meaning. Nate, it would be illegal to harbor a criminal. Are you guilty for letting a person in your home that you didn't know was a criminal when you let them in, but were told at the time you were charged?
All right, there's 2 things for criminal law. You need actus reus and mens rea. The act of letting a person in, that alone wouldn't be criminal. I would have to have the intent, right? I would have to know. So as soon as you say, if I don't know that they were a criminal, then that's when I've lost criminal intent, and they can be in my home. Does that make sense?
It does to me. I didn't know. I was like just trying.
The question is also harboring a criminal. If you discover that they are a criminal once they're in your place and you continue to harbor,
then you can be prosecuted if you keep them there.
You've got that mens rea.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what if you what is your obligation? And this is a genuine question. Are you supposed to immediately say, "Okay, I'm calling the cops," or can you just shut your mouth and say, "You can't be here, dude. Sorry."
It will depend. It depends on, because again, we were talking about statutes, so it really all depends on the statute. Some, is there an affirmative duty to report this to the police? Most of the times, you don't have an affirmative duty to report crimes. Okay. The biggest case in this, and this is going to shock a lot of people, is the case out of Las Vegas. There were two young men who went into a casino. There was a young African American girl who went to the male's bathroom by accident. The two gentlemen went into the bathroom. And his friend said, I looked into my friend's eyes and saw he was looking crazy. So the friend grabs the little girl by the throat, takes her to the stall, rapes and murders her. But the other guy who was standing there, right, he just walks out of the bathroom, walks past security, and just leaves. He doesn't say anything. Soon as his friend grabs the girl, he just walks out of the casino. Doesn't do anything, just walks out, goes home. So there was a big, his friend was prosecuted and went to jail for the rest of his life. But they were like, well, what do we do about the guy who saw him grab the little girl by the throat, take her to the, and they just walked out and didn't tell anybody? They tried to prosecute him, but it was overturned and he was unable to be prosecuted. He's free today. He has no charges because you don't have an affirmative duty to report anything to the police as a citizen. If he, let's say, for instance, if he closed the door behind him, then they would say he's an accessory after the fact. He closed the door, he did something. But by him just walking out and not saying anything and just going home,
what if he watched it? What if he watched it?
Yeah,
I'm wondering, because did he slide through because he walked out before the main course?
Grabbed her and he shoved her into the thing, and he literally just walked out the place, walked out and said nothing to anybody. He didn't hold any doors, he didn't do anything. They tried to get him. He's
going to hell either way, because
he's going to hell.
Disturbing.
But he actually said nothing. He said nothing. And the law, the way the law is that you don't have an affirmative duty to report any crimes. You should, but you don't have the affirmative duty to report any crimes.
How about civil? Can you get him civilly? For
what? For walking out of the bathroom? He didn't do anything.
Well, for not, I don't know, for allowing it to happen. I'm just asking. I'm throwing crap out there.
They didn't get him for anything. He's totally criminally, civilly liable. The only thing is they were trying to get him thrown out because he was going to a public school. So they were trying to give him. They were trying to get him to be thrown out. But even the school couldn't throw him out because he said he didn't have a legal duty to protect this girl. To retrieve. If he was a cop, yes. But he didn't have any. So like, for instance, some states started passing laws that said you had a duty to report, let's say if a child is being abused, everybody then has a duty to report that. But before, that wasn't the case. And in this case, it wasn't the case.
No, Nate and Eric, civilly, the evidence would have to be, you would have to prove beyond, according to the balance of probabilities, preponderance of the evidence, that what he did contributed to what happened. And, you'll have an argument if it didn't go anywhere in this particular case, that's an indication. But that is, you have to prove balance of probabilities that what his action or inaction actively contributed to the outcome. I
only asked because OJ got nailed civilly, but he didn't get nailed criminally. So I didn't know if there was a lighter threshold civilly that you could maybe sue him or get him.
Balance of probabilities versus beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's 50+1 civilly for liability, whereas it's beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal. And Robert and I, we're gonna maybe we'll get Dersh on to do it. We need to do the O.J. Simpson. I didn't know until I did the live stream with Dersh that the cops actually planted the blood on socks. So
that's why they found the chemical from the lab in the blood when they tested it.
Even if you think O.J.'s guilty, framing a guilty man is enough to get the guilty man off. I mean, that's nuts. That I didn't know that. I think I was 12 years old at the time, so I wasn't really, maybe 11, but I didn't pay attention to that at the time. I'm dying to know what I did not know then.
I have OJ's manager, by the way. You see, I'm trying to subtly throw this in there, folks. Check out the channel. But I have OJ's manager, Norm Pardo, on, who explains what happened. He hung out with OJ for like 12 years every day. Oh, wow. And I also have him on with an FBI former special agent in charge who debated him a little bit on whether it happened or didn't happen. So both different episodes, all in this channel. So please subscribe.
Everyone subscribe, hit the like, thumbs up thingy there, right there.
Yeah, please hit the like. The like is terrible. I'm looking, it's like 1,500 people here, and I forgot it was like 400 likes. I'm like, wow, what am I doing wrong?
You guys gotta like this stuff. We're yelling at each other.
Exactly.
Eric, that's a pretty good ratio. That's almost, you're almost at 30%. No,
No, it's supposed to. No, you can't say that.
I see someone here. It says, "Mark my words, Viva. Can you see the chat? You know any good reading material to get started with learning law?" I would defer to Robert Barnes on that. One of the things, I don't read very much. I read Rumple of the Bailey. My dad told me to watch it. Told me to read it, but to get started on the law books.
Well, listen, if you guys want to learn American law, it's going to take you 6 months. The only reason why I'm telling you that is because everyone who in the United States who's passed the bar probably learned in 3 months everything they needed to know to pass the bar exam. For instance, I would say go to Kaplan, go to any of those bar companies. They teach you 3 years of American law in 3 months. And if you have 6 months, you can learn it all. And
okay, I live in Virginia, Nate. I've been so tempted. I live in Virginia. I've been so tempted to just see if I could study and try to pass the stupid test.
You can. I took the bar in law school. I studied for the bar in law school and took it actually while I was still in law school. It's so weird because the big scam for law school, for most people who don't know, isn't the 3 years. For instance, let me go back. The classes that are on the bar that you're going to take for the bar exam are actually in your first year of law school. Your first year of law school, you're taking criminal law, constitutional law, that type of stuff. Your second and third year are really, you're practicing, you're taking some classes that you're going to take and practicing. So you're really 2 years removed when you take the bar exam from actually the information that you need to learn for the bar exam. So they have bar exam companies that the law school promotes that you pay like $1,200, $1,500 to and they teach you the law for 2 months. Most of the law on the bar exam that I passed, I didn't learn in law school. Like 50% of the bar exam, I learned fresh in 2 months just for the bar exam. So if you want to learn American law, like I tell all students, if you're really serious about going to law school, take 6 months, take a bar course, and by the time you go into law school, you'll know more than most of the people there, right? Your professors will be lost.
I might do this for content, for purpose. Find a state that doesn't require a law degree.
That's kind of.
I want to go clean, straight up, no studying. I want to see if what I've been doing on YouTube for the last 2 years has prepped me to pass the bar. Because I know Marsh v. Alabama now. I know New York Times versus Sullivan. I know the worst decision there was Nate. What's the worst decision you got? We talk about it all the time.
Oh, it's the eugenics one, right?
Jim Crow. No, I was about to say Plessy v. Ferguson, Korematsu.
Korematsu. 1800s.
Dred Scott.
I mean, so I think I could probably get far enough to guess the remaining answers.
I will say this: all those cases are irrelevant to the bar exam. Matter of fact, on the bar exam, they won't ask you about a single case.
Oh, good.
They won't ask you about a single case. That's how remove the bar exam from actually the practice of law. They won't ask you about a single case. Insane, right? It's funny because you probably know more about the law than most American lawyers who are practicing, but for the bar exam, it's not about the cases. It's about just rules and structure of the law. Here's the rule, here's the facts, apply it, and just move on.
Well, the thing, I certainly do not know federal rules of procedure. I mean, I know in as much as I've seen them in some cases, but yeah, and I didn't mention it in one of my last videos, but Quebec, since I've started doing this, has rewritten the entire Code of Civil Procedure. So if I go back to practice in Quebec, I mean, I know I revised the new code, but it's all new procedure. And what people don't realize before going into law, 90% of the practice is procedure, and it's soul crushing.
Yeah. It's funny because even now, like when I get another case or something like that, I literally, most of my the funds that I have that I work a case with goes to the paralegals. Like, my paralegals to draw up paperwork and file this and file that. It's 90% of it is not, or a lot of people think, practicing law is going into court and arguing a case. That's a rarity. Most of my cases never see a courtroom. I see checks without ever seeing a courtroom or even filing something in court.
Okay, somebody said, I guess Rekieta Law was talking about this maybe last night. Great show, by the way. Nick Rekieta's awesome dude. I've even been on the show. It's very cool. I don't know how the hell he does it. I'm falling over by the end, but
it's
amazing.
Rekieta, people don't appreciate it. I mean, I don't know, for those who don't know he exists, he is a beast in terms of the time he puts in. It's midnight to 3, goes on to Twitch, puts out regular content. I mean, it's a lifestyle. It's not a hobby. It's it's a lifestyle the way he does it, and it's an amazing thing because like back in the day when I was first getting started, the live streams were never something that I even contemplated. And I saw Nick. I watched him. It's like a radio show. He's hosting his own radio show.
Yeah, he calls himself a late night DJ, and I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah,
and you guys all have your own lanes, which is what makes it so fun. Because I've had Emily on now, Emily D. Baker.
Oh yeah.
And she's kind of like the culture and lifestyle lawyer. You have Nate, who's breaking down the criminal law aspect really solidly. You have David, who is just a fun Canadian who does it all. Well, and I mean, with bars, you're kind of getting in the political element and things like that. I'm guessing Uncivil's more constitutional findings. I'm not sure. He doesn't go into patent as much.
No, he's strictly appellate law. That's because with appellate law, they don't really deal with the facts. It's just strictly law. So that's what he likes to do.
Okay. And then me, I just like talking to everybody, which is cool.
And amazing thing, you have an eclectic crowd that you get on your channel, and some of the stuff I have more of an interest in, and some of the stuff I have less of an interest in. But you have an eclectic group. The stuff that I always find the most shocking and eye-opening is the FBI guys. And
oh yeah.
I forget who it was. Did you did it? Oh, the interview with John McAfee was amazing. If it's going to come back to bite him in the butt. And you did one with somebody who's a spy for 40 years, right?
Jack Barsky.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorites.
Mind blowing.
Yeah, he lived here for 16 years without being discovered. He lived here so long that he quit the Soviet Union. Hint, he said he had AIDS. They were like, "Oh, we'll give your money to the family." And that was his way, because they were so scared of AIDS in the Soviet Union that was one way he could actually break free from it. It's a really interesting. Oh, Buck versus Bell's another big one. I think that's the eugenics one. I always get confused.
Buck versus Bell is the one where they were talking. I think that's where they were infertile. What's it called? Sterilizing women. I think.
The eugenics. They're stopping there's lots of nasty decisions in our.
We're getting into another realm of what's going to be nasty decisions where people can be put on no-fly lists because they are of the wrong political party. Nobody has any rights to leave their houses. Leaving after curfew is a privilege, not a right. We're going to get
unless you're a dog. It's your dog. You're good.
People don't realize that these arguments have been made for years. Like for Muslims with the no-fly list, they've been making that argument for years, right? How can the government just say, "I talked to someone overseas and now I'm on a no-fly. I can't fly anywhere," right? And the government, and your argument was, well, the no-fly list is something that we tell that the airlines, you can still travel. It's just you can't fly. You don't have a right to fly. You have a right to travel. So go travel. You can walk it. But now I think when people find out that the government can extend this now to conservatives, conservatives who went to a protest.
It's called "Then They Came."
Now
"Then They Came" sums it all up. That poem.
Exactly. So the no-fly has always been a problem. I think now it's a problem because people see now the government. This is exactly what happened. The government overreaches, and now people are like, "Oh, now you could just put me on a no-fly list because I supported Trump." That's ridiculous. It's always been ridiculous. I think I'm just glad that the other side's waking up to saying this was ridiculous.
Well, it's always been ridiculous, and then you go and reassess it retrospectively, where it's all relative to the perceived threat in your own mind. And after 9/11, the media, the government made such a threat that people were like, "Okay, yeah, it's a bit of an encroachment, but it's justified because the threat is so real." And now they're trying to do the same thing with. They're trying to do the same thing with political support. It's the threat is so real. If these people fly, they're going to insurrect everywhere. I mean, it's
Well, thank you, Little Rock, by the way. He's going to be briefing the 8th Circuit.
Oh, Little Rock. All right.
He's out there doing a real job.
Little Rock has trouble sometimes making it to the Sunday night streams because he's telling me he's working late into the night and he has to take a break to listen to the stream.
Oh, yeah. And I've been writing this on social now ever since the whole Parler decision, but I totally believe that. If we're going to talk about social media, online, technically it's not censorship. Yes, I know it's First Amendment, so I call it suppression.
Oh man, it's the same. It's the same trajectory. Alex Jones was so nutsy and so out there, people accepted it, and now all of a sudden they do it to the president while he's still a sitting president. Now all of a sudden they're doing it to the people they know, people they like, and then all of a sudden it becomes objectionable.
Here we go. And this is one thing that I really wish. I'm guessing that Boz here is Eastern European because they actually give a damn about this much more than the average American. Curious how you guys are not seriously concerned about obvious politicization and corruption of courts today. Law became a joke. As a person who lived in communism and saw this growing up in oppression, I'm deeply concerned to see. Yes.
I am tremendously concerned. I look, I have a different level of anxiety than Robert, apparently, and I have a different hyperactivity of imagination.
Everybody has a different level of anxiety than Robert. He's like gravity. He just it's like
Robert, it's good, in 4 years the crazy laws that we pass now will get overturned, and he's optimistic and he's constructive about it, which is better than being anxious and being nervous and not sleeping. That being said, I'm anxious and I'm tremendously nervous about it. I see the way, seeing it in real time, how everything is getting weaponized, everything is getting politicized. They're going to strip lawyers of their bar licenses because they represented Trump. They're going to blacklist people from getting jobs after the administration. This is how you breed extremism. It's not how you cure it. And the court and when people when people feel that the politicians have let them down, the prosecution system has let them down, the judicial system has let them down, and then they start getting silenced because the big tech infrastructure is demonizing them, it doesn't go good places. Now the question is, who's going to be the person to step up and walk it back and have a vocal voice about it? And can it be done with the media that will not amplify that voice because they don't make their money by amplifying unity? I don't know. I find it concerning, not to be too dramatic.
I'm just going to be honest, and I don't really see I do see a political, the politics in it when it comes to appointing judges and all that stuff. Obviously, you're going to appoint more right-leaning judges if you're Republican versus Democrat. But reading opinions, when I read opinions on that are both on the ground level and moving up even to the Supreme Court, I don't see the hyper polarization that most people see. Like, for instance, I'm a fan of Citizens United, right? I think Citizens United was rightly decided. Everybody on the left doesn't think so. I believe there are some cases on the right. Like I think McDonald was correctly decided. There's a lot of people on the left who don't. And when you're looking at cases, I think a lot of people don't understand the legal process and how many hurdles it takes to get a case heard and to actually win a case. And when there's a negative outcome based on, let's say, a procedure or based on anything, people assume malice where it's really just procedure. There's been so many times where I've seen cases lost because somebody just didn't follow the right procedure. You didn't raise this as a defense. You didn't say this, and you've lost your case. And that's just the way the court system is.
You're using the wrong line count on paper.
Well, but
sometimes that happens. It's happened. It's happened one time before. There's I'm going to tell you guys my page limit problem. There was one time I wrote this long motion to dismiss for a criminal client, right? Criminal client, which is going to be the case that the New York Times is doing the story on. But there's a criminal client. I turned in a 40-page motion to dismiss. I was so proud of it. So much law. It was like a law school brief. And you know what the court said? We're throwing out the last 15 pages. I'm like, why? Oh, because there's a 25-page limit. So the first 25 and throw out the last 15. I'm like, what the hell? My whole motion is destroyed. But then you got to take it back and you have to do it exactly what it is. So that's what I'm saying. I understand justice. We all want justice. But there are rules and procedures. And when I read a case, like even with Paula and all these other cases, when I look at them, I try to look at them as I'm the judge. And these people are making these arguments. It's weird because I'll even say this now. Now reading cases, I used to never look up to see who appointed the judge. I used to never do that. I didn't care, right? If I agree with the rule, but now I do because I want to see if it's right. And I will say this: I can tell now if this ruling came out this way. 9 times out of 10, I can say, "Oh, that's a Democratic appointed judge," and if it came, it's a Republican.
And that's when you're going off the rails.
But I'll say this: recently, I've been off with the Trump lawsuits for the election. Like the 3 Trump judges, I thought they were all Democrat appointed. I was like, oh my God, this must be a Democratic judge. And then I went and looked. I'm like, oh, these were appointed by Trump. So that gave me hope to say, well, all this stuff is a political. Yes, you're going to lean one way or the other way, but the law is still the law. And I think if it's inconvenient, that's one thing. But I don't think these judges are that politically attuned. I think there is, but I just don't think it's as bad as we think it is.
Okay, we've got a super chat here. What scares me the most is not the government. We can fix that given enough will to do so. What scares me is the people, agree with them or not. I know people say that conservatives were given the chance to prove their stance, but failed to show evidence.
Well, I'll move off of the election lawsuits for the purposes of this point. When Nate, brings up the example of, the judge, there's procedure, you got to follow it. Yeah. When the judge picks on procedure of one party but not the other, when the judge remarks that a mandamus is an extraordinary remedy that should only be handed out in the most extraordinary circumstances, and then denies one to one person and then finds a way to grant it to another. The whole thing about the law is supposed to be the slave to procedure and not its master. It's a French expression. I'm just trying to head. But the idea that the procedure is oftentimes part of the thing that's weaponized in order to favor not necessarily a political party. I mean, there's the old expression that a good lawyer knows the law, the better lawyer knows the judge. It's like it is it is abused and it is exploited to favor a foregone conclusion, a foregone interest. And we've all seen it. I mean, we've seen it in high profile cases. We've seen Flynn, McCloskey. I would argue somewhat also in Soho Karen. When the law is being used to its fullest extent against certain issues and certain situations that have certain political ramifications, and then it is being totally ignored in other cases where you're letting protesters out of jail, where you're releasing criminals from jail because of COVID, where that's when the system starts to break down, when people don't have faith in it, and people have seen the way it's worked and people are losing faith in it. And this election cycle, just to bring it back, has not reinstored. Is that a word in English? Has not reinstated.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying now.
In French, it's reinstalled. It has not restored. It's not restored. Has not restored faith.
I love that you put the on the French. It's like you don't just say it and that correct.
No, but what we've seen this election cycle has not restored faith. I've lost my screen. Whatever. If you can tell me. And the way the media has dealt with it now to demonize anybody who feels that way and to deplatform them and to shut their YouTube channels down. That's not going to restore faith either. That's just going to make people believe even more firmly in what they're.
But the thing is that the law is never black and white. Like even some of the examples that you just brought up. In one case, they find it's a mandamus. In another case, they find it's not a mandamus. But but those are heavily fact specific issues, right? The reason why this, you got to tell me why. What was the total?
They always err one direction, though, Nate. I think that's the point. It's like if you always find the procedure that works against one side or the other, and I'm not saying that's the case, but I am saying that I'm guessing that the point being made is that, coincidentally, the procedure always seems to work against this particular party of type and not against the other party of type. And then that could be a problem.
You would also agree correlation doesn't mean causation, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can flip heads 10 times in a row. That's absolutely true. But the rarity of it compounds over time whether the correlation to causation comes into effect. There is a certain point where mathematics do, raise their ugly head and say, okay, the coincidental point is beyond any kind of reason.
And that's exactly what I'm saying here. We can there are thousands of court cases that happen every day, and there's going to be some that are wrong, right? We don't have a perfect system. But in that case, though, the law is very fact specific, and I think just to brand, all this always happens to right versus not left. I don't think that's accurate. I do think you can point out some cases where it happened to the right side, but I can also point out some cases where it happened to the left side in right-leaning states. So
I'm not saying that doesn't happen. And again, I said I'm not proving that's the case, but you should always check it. But on that note, I know I've held you guys away from your family for a while, and David's got to chase a video.
Good luck with that video, man. I'm surprised that's ridiculous.
I actually multitasked. I community released it while we were streaming, and now I'm going to wait an hour or two, then publish it. So
Perfect. So we got I'm a member on the channel too. I probably have the alert somewhere. Now, guys, thank you so much. We're trying to boil the ocean, so there's a lot to cover, and I hope you're both coming back.
All
right. Well, fantastic. And folks, please let me beg a little bit. Subscribe. Consider. It's free. As Nate likes to say, it's free. You can change your mind later.
More important than subscribing, for those of you who already done it, share it away on Twitter, share it away on social media. Let people know that Eric exists.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you guys so much for helping them know I exist, because it's people like you that really, really help all of us. So
I love the discussion.
Yeah, and thank you guys. And again, my last thing to say is this is how you should disagree, right? We all vehemently disagree with some of these points, but you can do it in a respectful way, right? We don't have to cancel each other, because I'm reporting Viva tomorrow on Twitter.
I know Nate is going to call me out, and we're going to get.
Well, both of you are copying out. You're supposed to be off Twitter on 30 days, and I've seen you both on there, so I report you both.
Viva truth.